The water came at 0347 hours, and Sergeant First Class Yolanda Okafor heard it before she saw it. A sound like distant thunder that never stopped, growing louder, growing closer. In 14 years of Army service, she had faced bullets in Fallujah, IEDs in Kandahar, and men who swore she did not belong in their uniform. None of that prepared her for what was coming down the Helmand River Valley. Because Yolanda Okafor had a secret that no one in her platoon knew. She was terrified of water. 72 hours earlier, FOB Resolute baked under the Afghan sun. Before we continue with Sergeant Okafor's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone underestimated prove everyone wrong where you are from. Okafor stood at the edge of the PT field, watching her fire team finish their morning run. Private First Class Theodore Ron, the youngest at 19, struggled at the back of the formation. His face was red and his breathing ragged, but he did not quit. She noted that. Quitting was easy. Continuing when your body screamed to stop required something deeper. The rest of the platoon had already finished, and she could hear Sergeant First Class Dominic Vance holding court near the water station. His voice carried across the dirt. "Looks like Okafor's charity cases are slowing down again," Vance said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe she needs some help running a simple PT session." Staff Sergeant Bo Childress laughed at Vance's comment. The two of them had been undermining her since she arrived at FOB Resolute 3 months ago. Small comments. Missed supply requests. Radio delays when she needed support. Nothing she could prove, everything she could feel. Okafor did not respond. She had learned that responding gave men like Vance exactly what they wanted. Ron crossed the finish line and nearly collapsed. Specialist Kenji Nakamura caught him before he hit the ground and helped him toward the shade. Okafor walked over and knelt beside the young private. "You finished," she said. "That is what matters." Ron's eyes were wet, and she knew it was not just from the exertion. He had heard what Vance said. Everyone had. "Sergeant, I am sorry," Ron started. Okafor held up her hand. "You did not apologize for effort. You apologized for quitting." "Did you quit?" "No, Sergeant." "Then drink water and recover. We have patrol prep in 2 hours." She stood and found Childress walking toward them with that smirk he always wore when Vance was watching. He was 6'3" and built like he lived in the weight room because he did. He stopped directly in front of Ron. "Charity case needs his mommy to hold his hand," Childress said. "Maybe the Army is not for everyone, Private." Okafor stepped between them. Her voice was calm and low. "Walk away, Staff Sergeant." Childress looked down at her. She was 5'9", which meant he had 6 inches on her. He thought that mattered. "Or what?" he asked. "Or I filed a harassment report I have been documenting for 11 weeks, she replied. Every comment, every missed requisition, every coincidental radio failure. Dated, timed, witnessed. Captain Ibarra has already seen a draft. The smirk faded from Childress's face. He glanced toward Vance, who was suddenly very interested in his water bottle. "Just having some fun," Childress muttered. "Find different fun. Away from my soldiers." He walked away without another word. Ron stared at her like she had just performed a miracle. "Sergeant," he whispered, "you really have all that documented?" Okafor allowed herself a small smile. "Every single word, Private. Now hydrate." Nakamura handed Ron a water bottle and gave Okafor a slight nod. He was one of the few who had never questioned her competence. His respect was quiet but consistent, and she valued it more than he knew. The sun climbed higher as the morning routine continued. Okafor led her team through equipment checks and patrol briefings with the precision that had earned her Ranger tab in 14 years of service. She had deployed to more combat zones than half the FOB combined. She had carried wounded soldiers through streets filled with gunfire. She had earned every rank on her chest. None of that mattered to men like Vance. She was a woman. She was an immigrant. She was taking a position he believed belonged to someone else. Someone who looked like him. That afternoon, Captain Renata Ibarra called a briefing in the operations center. The company commander was a no-nonsense officer who judged soldiers by results rather than reputation. Okafor respected her, even if she wished Ibarra would do more to address the toxic elements in the unit. "Listen up," Ibarra announced. OP Dagger needs a new rotation. Previous team is rotating home. I need a fire team there by tomorrow morning. Okafor watched Vance whisper something to Childress. Both of them glanced at her. Sergeant First Class Okafor, Ibarra continued. Your team has the assignment. Something cold settled in Okafor's stomach. OP Dagger was positioned on low ground near the river bend. Every soldier at FOB Resolute knew it flooded during heavy rains. It was the worst observation post on the base. Understood, Captain, Okafor said. She would not give Vance the satisfaction of seeing her object. After the briefing, she overheard Vance talking to Ibarra near the door. Good call, giving Okafor something manageable, he said. She seems overwhelmed with the regular rotation. Dagger will be easier for her to handle. Okafor's hands curled into fists at her sides. Easier. He had maneuvered this. She was certain of it. That evening, she walked past the improvised swimming hole some soldiers had dug near the western perimeter. The water was murky brown, barely 10 feet across. She stopped and stared at it longer than she meant to. Her reflection rippled on the surface. For a moment, she was 16 again, watching her little brother Kelechi slip beneath floodwaters in Lagos. His hand reaching up, her fingers brushing his. Then nothing but brown water and screaming. Sergeant? Nakamura's voice pulled her back. She turned away from the water. Just thinking, specialist. Make sure the team is ready to move at 0500. She walked toward her quarters without looking back at the water. Tomorrow she would take her team to OP Dagger. Tomorrow she would prove that Vance's sabotage meant nothing. She did not know that in 72 hours, the Helmand River would try to take everything from her, and she would refuse to let it. The convoy to OP Dagger left FOB Resolute at 0500 hours when the sky was still gray and the air held the last coolness it would have all day. Okafor sat in the lead vehicle with Nakamura beside her and Ron in the back with the two other members of her fire team, Corporal Dwayne Estes and Private First Class Maria Solano. The route wound east through terrain that shifted from hard-packed dirt to soft sand near the river bend. 20 minutes into the drive, they reached a shallow stream crossing. The water was barely ankle-deep, running clear over smooth stones. The vehicles ahead splashed through without slowing. Okafor's hands tightened on her rifle. She felt the familiar cold spreading through her chest. The rational part of her mind knew this water was nothing. A trickle, a nuisance. But rationality had no power over the memories that surged whenever she saw moving water. Kelechi's face beneath the surface. His eyes wide. His mouth open in a silent scream. Sergeant, Nakamura said quietly. We're crossing now. She blinked and realized the vehicle had stopped. The driver was waiting for her signal. Go, she said. Her voice did not waver. She had 14 years of practice hiding this. The vehicle lurched forward into the stream. Water splashed against the doors. Okafor forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose. In 4 counts. Out 4 counts. The technique she had learned from an army therapist years ago. The technique that kept the panic from showing. Ron was watching her in the rearview mirror. She could feel his eyes on her. The young private saw too much for his own good. The crossing took 8 seconds. It felt like 8 hours. OP Dagger came into view as they crested a small rise. The position was exactly as bad as Okafor remembered from the briefings. A sandbagged observation post set on a slight elevation roughly 800 meters east of the main FOB. The Helmand River curved around it to the north and east, creating a peninsula of dry ground that would become an island if the water rose enough. The previous team had already packed their gear. Their sergeant, a tired-looking man named Wojcik, met Okafor as she stepped out of the vehicle. All yours, Sergeant, Wojcik said. He did not look happy to be leaving her here. Any issues I should know about? Wojcik glanced toward the river. Locals call this place the Drowning Post. Says it floods bad every few years. River has been higher than normal this week. Probably nothing, but keep an eye on it. Okafor followed his gaze. The Helmand was brown and swollen, moving faster than she expected. Trees along the far bank had water halfway up their trunks. How high was it when you arrived? she asked. 3 feet lower, Wojcik admitted. But we got word there is snowmelt coming down from the mountains. Should level off in a few days. Should. Yeah. Wojcik shrugged. Should. Good luck, Sergeant. His convoy pulled away, and Okafor was left with her team in a position that felt like a trap waiting to spring. She put them to work immediately. Nakamura set up the communications equipment and ran checks on all frequencies. Estes and Solano reinforced the sandbag walls and cleared firing lanes. Ron followed Okafor as she walked the perimeter, and she used the opportunity to teach him how to read terrain. Water flows downhill, she said. Always know where downhill is. Always know your escape route before you need it. In case of attack, Ron asked. In case of anything. The enemy you see is not always the most dangerous one. They reached the northern edge of the position where the ground sloped down toward the river. The water was close. Too close. Okafor could smell the mineral tang of it, could hear the constant rushing sound that made her skin prickle. Sergeant, Ron said carefully, back at the stream crossing. Are you okay? She considered lying. It would be easy. She had lied about this for 18 years. But something about Ron's earnest young face made her pause. He had trusted her with his vulnerabilities. Maybe trust went both ways. I do not like water, she said finally. I had a bad experience when I was young. Ron waited. He did not push. My brother drowned. Okafor continued. She had not said these words out loud in years. I was 16. He was 12. Flood waters in Lagos. I tried to save him, but the current was too strong. He slipped out my hands. Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, but you still join the army. You still do river crossings and amphibious training and all of it. Yes. Why? Because fear is not an excuse. Okafor turned to face him directly. Because the day I let fear stop me from doing my job is the day someone else dies because I was too weak to save them. I cannot save Kelechi, but I have saved others since. That has to mean something. It does, Ron said. It means everything. They stood there for a moment, two soldiers on the edge of swollen river, understanding each other in a way that rank and age could not diminish. The radio crackled and broke the silence. Nakamura's voice came through. Sergeant Okafor, you need to hear this. They jogged back to the communications post where Nakamura had patched into the FOB frequency. Vance's voice was unmistakable. Just checking on our friends at Dagger, Vance was saying to someone at the operations center. Making sure Sergeant Okafor has everything she needs for her rest and relaxation assignment. Childress laughed in the background. Okafor's jaw tightened. Rest and relaxation. He was selling the narrative that she had requested light duty, that she could not handle real work, that being sent to this flooding death trap was somehow a favor. Want me to respond? Nakamura asked. His voice was hard with anger. No, let him talk. Words do not matter. Results do. But Sergeant, he is lying about you to everyone. Okafor looked at her team. Ron's fists were clenched. Estes and Solano had stopped working to listen. They were all angry on her behalf. Listen to me, she said. All of you. What Vance says does not change what we do. We hold this position. We do our job. We watch each other's backs. When we return to FOB Resolute, our performance will speak louder than his gossip. Understood? Yes, Sergeant, they answered in unison. That night, Okafor took the first watch while her team slept. The river's sounds were louder in the darkness, and she sat with her back to the water so she would not have to see it. She pulled a sealed envelope from her breast pocket. The paper was worn soft from years of carrying. Her mother's handwriting was visible through the thin material, but she did not open it. She never opened it. Just holding it was enough. Someday, she thought, when the right moment comes. She tucked it away as Nakamura approached for the watch change. River is still rising, he reported. Maybe another foot since we arrived. Okafor nodded. Keep monitoring. Wake me if anything changes. She lay down on her cot, but sleep was slow to come. The sound of rushing water filled her dreams, and somewhere in the darkness, a 12-year-old boy called her name. Dawn came gray and heavy with clouds that had not been in the forecast. Okafor woke to the sound of Nakamura's urgent voice calling her name. Sergeant, we have movement on the ridgeline. She was on her feet in seconds, rifle in hand, crossing to the observation point where Nakamura had his binoculars trained on the high ground to the north. The ridgeline was 1,200 meters out, a jagged spine of rock and scrub that overlooked the river valley and their position. "Show me," she said. Nakamura handed her the binoculars. "2 figures," she said after a moment. "Maybe 3, moving between those rock formations at the crest. They disappeared about 30 seconds ago," Nakamura confirmed. "But they were definitely watching us." Okafor studied the terrain. The ridgeline offered perfect observation of Opie Dagger. Anyone up there could track their movements, count their numbers, identify their defensive positions. This was reconnaissance. The question was what came after. "Get me FOB Resolute on the radio," she ordered. Nakamura worked the communications equipment, while Okafor continued scanning the ridge. The figures did not reappear, but she knew they were still there. She could feel eyes on her position like a physical weight. The radio connected, and Okafor's stomach dropped when she heard Childress's voice answer. "FOB Resolute Operations. Go ahead, Dagger. This is Sergeant First Class Okafor. I have observed enemy reconnaissance activity on the northern ridgeline. Request drone overwatch to confirm hostile presence and numbers." There was a pause. Then Childress's voice came back with barely concealed amusement. "Enemy reconnaissance? You sure it was not just some goat herders, Sergeant?" Okafor kept her voice flat and professional. 2 to 3 military-aged males conducting observation of our position from concealed locations. Movement patterns consistent with reconnaissance. Requesting drone support. Another pause. "I will pass it up the chain, but we have limited drone assets today. Might be a while." The connection cut before she could respond. Nakamura looked at her. "He's not going to do anything, is he?" "We will see." 2 hours passed. The clouds grew darker and a wind picked up from the east, carrying the smell of rain. Okafor rotated her team through observation shifts, making sure the ridgeline was never unwatched. She documented everything in her patrol log. Times, locations, movement patterns. If Childress buried her request, she would have evidence. Just before noon, Captain Ibarra's voice crackled through the radio. "Dagger, this is Resolute 6. Understand you reported possible enemy observation of your position." Okafor grabbed the handset. "Confirmed, Captain. 2 to 3 individuals conducting surveillance from a northern ridgeline at grid coordinates 479er 226. I have documented observations over a 2-hour period. Stand by, Dagger. I am redirecting a Raven drone to your sector." 20 minutes later, the small reconnaissance drone appeared overhead. Okafor watched it circle toward the ridgeline, its camera feed going directly to the operations center at FOB Resolute. Ibarra's voice returned. "Dagger, drone confirms 4 individuals with weapons at your reported location. Appears to be an observation team. Good eyes, Sergeant." Okafor allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. "Request reinforcement or authorization to relocate to more defensible position, Captain." The pause that followed was too long. "Negative on both, Dagger. We have operations ongoing to the west that require all available assets. Maintain position and report any changes." Resolute 6 out. Nakamura shook his head. "They confirm we are being watched by armed hostiles, and their response is to do nothing. Their response is to trust us to do our job," Okafor said. Though she shared his frustration. "We hold this position. We stay alert. We survive until they can support us." The afternoon brought the first rain. Light at first, barely more than mist, but steady. Okafor checked the river and found it had risen another 6 inches since morning. The brown water churned with debris now, branches and leaves torn from upstream. She gathered her team in the covered portion of their position. "We need to prepare for flooding," she announced. "I want everything critical moved to the highest point of this position. Ammunition, medical supplies, radios. If the water comes up fast, we grab our weapons and we move to that elevated ground on the south side." "Understood?" Ron raised his hand. "How bad do you think it could get, Sergeant?" "Bad enough that I want us ready," Okafor replied. "Probably nothing happens. But if something does happen, preparation is the difference between survival and drowning." The word hung in the air. Drowning. Her team did not know the full weight of that word for her, except for Ron, who looked at her with something like admiration. They spent the next 2 hours preparing. Okafor supervised the repositioning of supplies and conducted a water survival refresher with her team. She taught them how to float with their equipment, how to swim in a current, how to rescue someone being pulled downstream. The lessons came from training manuals, but also from memories she wished she did not have. Solano asked where she learned to teach water survival so well. Okafor paused before answering. I learned the hard way, private. Now you're learning the easy way. Pay attention. By evening, the rain had intensified. Not a downpour, but steady and relentless. The river was noticeably higher, the sound of it louder than before. Okafor estimated another foot of rise since morning. She reported the conditions to FOB Resolute. This time Vance answered. Copy your weather report, Dagger, he said. Forecast shows rain clearing by tomorrow. See tides. Be advised, river has risen approximately 18 inches in 12 hours, Okafor pressed, requesting updated assessment of upstream conditions. Vance sighed audibly over the radio. Okafor, it is rain. It happens in Afghanistan. Stop looking for excuses to abandon your post. Resolute out. The connection died. Okafor set down the handset slowly. Nakamura, she said, see if you can find any information about upstream water conditions on the emergency frequencies. Dam reports, flood warnings, anything. Nakamura nodded and began scanning channels. Ron appeared at her elbow. Sergeant, what if he is wrong? Then we do what soldiers do. Okafor checked her rifle and looked toward the ridgeline, invisible now in the darkness and rain. We adapt and we survive. She took the first watch again that night. The rain fell and the river rose, and somewhere on the ridgeline, enemy eyes watched and waited. At 0215 hours, Nakamura shook her awake with fear in his eyes. Sergeant, I intercepted an emergency broadcast. There's a dam upstream. The structure is compromised. They're saying a flash flood is coming. Okafor was already moving before he finished speaking. Wake everyone, she ordered. We're leaving now. But even as she said the words, she heard it. That sound from her nightmares. Thunder that never stopped. Growing louder. Growing closer. The sound was everything. It filled the darkness, swallowed the rain, drowned out her own heartbeat. Okafor had heard recordings of flash floods during training. Nothing had prepared her for this. A roar like a living thing, hungry and unstoppable, coming for them through the black Afghan night. Move, she screamed. South side, high ground now. Her team scrambled from their sleeping positions. Ron stumbled in the darkness, and Okafor grabbed his arm, hauling him upright. Nakamura had the radio pack on his back. Estes and Solano were already running toward the elevated ground she had identified that afternoon. Then she saw it. A wall of black water emerged from the darkness, visible only because of the foam churning white at its crest. It was at least 8 feet high, maybe more, moving faster than a person could run. Trees snapped like twigs as it came. The sound was deafening now, a constant thunder that vibrated in her chest. Okafor shoved Ron toward the others. Go, go, go. She turned back for the supply cache, the ammunition, the medical kit. They would need those to survive what came after. The water hit before she reached them. It struck her like a truck, ripping her feet from the ground and spinning her into chaos. Brown water filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She tumbled in the current, unable to tell up from down. Her rifle was gone, torn from her hands. Something hard struck her shoulder, and she felt the snap of pain through the cold. Kelechi, her mind screamed. Just like Kelechi. No, not like Kelechi. She was not 16 anymore. She was Sergeant First Class Yolanda Okafor, and she did not drown. She forced her body to relax, to stop fighting the current. Training took over. She let the water carry her until she felt herself rising, then kicked hard toward what she prayed was the surface. Her head broke through, and she gasped, sucking in air mixed with spray. The world was water now. OP Dagger was gone, erased like it had never existed. She could see nothing but churning flood and debris. The roar was still deafening, but she forced herself to focus, to scan for her team. A shape in the darkness. Sandbags piled against something solid, creating a small island in the chaos. She swam toward it, fighting the current with everything she had. Her hands found rough burlap, and she pulled herself up onto the debris pile. It was unstable, shifting beneath her weight, but it was above water. She clung there and screamed into the darkness. Ron, Nakamura, Aegis, Solano. Sound off. Nothing. Just the water and the rain and the thunder of the flood. Then, faintly, a voice. Sergeant. Okafor turned toward the sound. 20 meters away, barely visible, a figure clung to a tree that had somehow remained standing. The trunk was bent almost horizontal by the current, but it held. Ron, she shouted. Hold on. I am coming. She did not let herself think about what she was doing. She slid back into the water and swam, fighting across the current rather than against it, letting it carry her toward the tree while she angled her body. The technique was exhausting, but it worked. Her hand found bark, and she pulled herself along the trunk until she reached the young private. Ron's face was white with terror. His right leg hung at a wrong angle below the knee, the bone clearly broken. He had one arm wrapped around a branch and was shaking violently. I have you, Okafor said. She wedged herself against the trunk and got her arms under his shoulders. I have you, Private. You are not letting go, and neither am I. My leg, Ron gasped. I think it is broken. I know. We will deal with it. Right now we survive. Understood? Yes, Sergeant. They clung to the tree as the flood raged around them. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Okafor lost track of time. The water level slowly dropped as the initial surge spread across the valley, but remained chest-high even at the tree. Another voice cut through the darkness. Sergeant Okafor. She turned and saw Nakamura pulling himself across a tangle of debris toward them. His forehead was bleeding from a gash above his eye, and his movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. He reached the tree and nearly slipped back into the water before Okafor caught his arm. Head wound, she said. How bad? Cannot tell. Dizzy. Hard to think. Concussion at minimum. Maybe worse. She needed to get him stable, get both of them to solid ground, find the rest of her team. Estes and Solano, she demanded. Did you see them? Nakamura shook his head and winced at the movement. Lost them in the water. I think they went downstream. Okafor forced herself to breathe. Downstream meant toward FOB Resolute. If they survived the initial surge, the main base might have reached them by now. She had to believe that. The alternative was unacceptable. The flood continued to recede. Within an hour, the water had dropped enough that Okafor could see solid ground emerging to the south. The elevated position she had identified that afternoon was there, battered but intact. A small miracle. We move, she announced. Nakamura, can you walk? I think so. Ron cannot. I will carry him. Stay close to me and do not fall. She lifted Ron onto her back in a fireman's carry, ignoring the screaming pain in her shoulder from whatever had struck her in the water. The private was not heavy, maybe 160 soaking wet, but every step through the knee-deep water and mud was agony. They reached the elevated ground as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the horizon. Okafor laid Ron down as gently as she could and immediately began assessing their situation. One rifle, pulled from the mud nearby. 2 magazines, discovered in a torn pouch that had washed up on the debris. A single medical kit that Nakamura had somehow kept attached to his pack. 1 MRE that Ron had stuffed in his cargo pocket before the flood hit. No radio. No communication with FOB Resolute. No idea if help was coming or if anyone even knew they had survived. And in the growing light, Okafor saw something else. Movement on the ridgeline to the north. Multiple figures emerging from cover, looking down at the devastation. Looking down at them. The enemy had waited for this moment. They had known the flood was coming, and now they were moving to finish what the water had started. Dawn revealed the scope of the destruction. Where Opie Dagger had stood, there was nothing but brown water and scattered debris. The Hellman River had swallowed their position whole and spread across the valley like a wound. Trees lay flattened in rows pointing downstream. Equipment, sandbags, and unidentifiable wreckage dotted the flooded landscape. Okafor forced herself to look away from the water and focus on what she could control. Nakamura sat propped against a mud-covered boulder, his eyes unfocused and his skin pale beneath the dried blood on his forehead. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but his responses were slow, his words sometimes slurred. He needed a hospital. He needed surgery. He had neither. Ron lay on his back with a shattered leg, immobilized using branches and strips torn from his uniform. The break was bad, the bone not through the skin, but visibly displaced beneath it. Every small movement made him gasp. He had not complained once. Okafor knelt beside him and checked the improvised splint. "How is the pain?" she asked. "Manageable, Ron Leet." His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. She pulled the single MRE from his cargo pocket and opened it. "You need to eat. Keep your strength up. What about you and Nakamura?" "I'm not hungry." Nakamura cannot keep food down with that concussion. "Eat, Private. That is an order." Ron managed a weak smile. "Yes, Sergeant." She left him with the MRE and moved to the edge of their small island of high ground. The water had receded further, dropping to ankle depth across most of the surrounding terrain, but the mud beneath was treacherous. Anyone trying to cross it would move slowly, struggle for footing, make noise. That included enemies. It also included rescuers. She raised the salvaged rifle and checked it again. The weapon was caked with mud, but functional. She had cleaned it 3 times already, working the action until it moved smoothly. 2 magazines, 14 rounds in each. 28 chances to keep her soldiers alive. 28 rounds against however many fighters were on that ridgeline. "Sergeant," Nakamura's voice was strained. "I need to tell you something." She returned to his side and crouched down. "What is it?" "Before the flood, when I was scanning the emergency frequencies." He paused, gathering his thoughts through the fog of his concussion. "I heard something else. Taliban communications. They were talking about the dam." "What about it?" "They knew." Nakamura's eyes met hers. "They knew the dam was going to fail. They were waiting for it. I think they sabotaged it." The words hit her like a second flood. This was not a natural disaster that the enemy had exploited. This was an attack. Coordinated, planned, designed to destroy whoever was stationed at OP Dagger. Designed to kill her team. "Are you certain?" she asked. "I heard them say the word for dam. And flood. And then coordinates that matched the ridgeline. They were in position before the water came." Okafor sat back on her heels. The implications cascaded through her mind. Vance had pushed for her to be assigned here. He had called it light duty, rest, and relaxation. Had he known? Was he part of this? No, that was too far. Vance was petty and ambitious, but he was not a traitor. He had wanted to humiliate her, not kill her. He had sent her into a trap without knowing it was a trap. But the enemy had known. They had planned this, and now they were coming to confirm the kill. Movement on the ridgeline caught her eye. She raised the rifle and peered through the iron sights. 3 figures descending the slope, picking their way through the rocks. They moved with the confidence of men who believed their targets were already dead. She tracked them for a long moment, calculating distance and angle. 800 meters. Too far for accurate fire with iron sights and a mud-fouled rifle. She needed them closer. "Sergeant." Ron's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" Okafor lowered the rifle and turned to face her wounded soldiers. Both of them looked at her with absolute trust. They believed she could save them. They believed she had a plan. She did not have a plan. She had 28 rounds, 2 men who could not walk, and enemies who wanted them dead. The math did not work. The situation was impossible. But impossible had never stopped her before. "Here is what we do," she said, and her voice carried the calm authority that 14 years of service had forged. "We stay quiet. We stay hidden. We make them come to us. This mud is our friend. They will be slow, loud, and exposed. I will be fast, silent, and waiting." "What about us?" Nakamura asked. "You're my eyes. Watch the flanks. Tell me if anyone tries to circle around. Ron, I need you to stay absolutely still. Your leg cannot take any more trauma. If fighting starts, you keep your head down and you do not move." "Understood?" Both men nodded. Okafor looked at them, her soldiers, her responsibility. She thought about Kalechi, about his hands slipping from hers, about 18 years of carrying that failure. She would not fail again. I'm going to get you home, she said. Both of you. That is not a promise. That is a fact. She took position behind the boulder that offered the best view of the approaches. The enemy fighters had disappeared into a gully, temporarily hidden from view. They would emerge closer, maybe 600 meters, maybe 5, still too far. She waited. The sun rose higher, burning away the clouds. The mud began to steam, and somewhere in that devastated valley, men with rifles crept toward her position, believing they hunted helpless survivors. They were wrong. Ron's voice drifted to her from behind. Sergeant, does this count as combat pay? Okafor almost laughed. It surprised her, the urge to laugh in the middle of all this death and danger. But that was Ron, finding lightness in darkness, refusing to let fear win. I will make sure the paperwork reflects it, Private. She settled her cheek against the rifle stock and watched the gully. The first enemy head appeared, then a second. She held her breath and let them come closer. 400 meters now. Closer. 300. Her finger moved to the trigger. 250 meters. Okafor watched the 3 fighters emerge fully from the gully. They moved in a loose formation, rifles held casually, scanning the debris field with the relaxed posture of men expecting to find corpses. One of them pointed toward her position and said something that made the others laugh. They thought this was cleanup. They thought the flood had done their work for them. 200 meters. She controlled her breathing. In through the nose for counts. Out through the mouth for counts. Her heartbeat slowed. The rifle steadied against her shoulder. The pain for whatever had struck her in the flood faded to background noise. 150 meters. The lead fighter stopped. He raised binoculars to his eyes and scanned the elevated ground where Okafor lay hidden. For a long moment, he seemed to look directly at her. Then he lowered the binoculars and waved his companions forward. 100 meters. Now, Okafor squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the lead fighter dropped. Before his body hit the mud, she shifted aim and fired twice more. The second fighter spun and fell. The third threw himself flat and scrambled for cover behind a tangle of debris. 2 down, 1 hiding. 25 rounds remaining. She waited. The hidden fighter did not move. She could see the edge of his boot protruding from behind the wreckage, but she did not have an angle on the rest of him. Sergeant. Nakamura's voice was urgent. More movement on the ridge. A lot more. She risked a glance toward the high ground and felt her stomach drop. At least a dozen figures were scrambling down the slope now, spreading out as they descended. The gunfire had announced her position. They knew she was alive. They knew she was fighting, and they were sending everyone. The hidden fighter broke from cover and ran back toward the gully. Okafor tracked him and fired. The round caught him in the back, and he went down hard, sliding face first into the mud. 3 down, 24 rounds remaining, 12 or more coming. She pulled back from her position and moved to Nakamura. Can you use a pistol? He blinked at her, processing the question through his concussion. I think so. She pressed her sidearm into his hands. Anything comes from the east, you shoot it. Do not think. Just shoot. Nakamura nodded and turned himself painfully to face the eastern approach. Okafor crawled to Ron next. The young private was pale but alert, his eyes tracking her movements. I need you to watch the west, she said. You see anyone, you call out. Loudly. Can you do that? Yes, Sergeant. His voice shook, but his jaw was set. I can do that. She squeezed his shoulder once, then moved to a new position behind a different section of debris. The approaching fighters would have marked her original location. She needed to be somewhere else when they arrived. The next 10 minutes were chaos. The enemy fighters advanced in 2 groups, trying to flank her position from both sides. They were more cautious now, using cover, moving in short rushes. But the mud betrayed them. Every step squelched and sucked. Every rush was slower than it should have been. Okafor used that. She waited until they committed to movement, then fired. 1 round, 1 target. She could not afford to miss. A fighter rose from behind a fallen tree, and she dropped him. Another tried to sprint across an open stretch of mud, and she put him down before he made it halfway. A third got close enough that she could see his face, young and bearded and terrified, before her bullet ended him. 8 rounds remaining. 2 on the left, Nakamura called out. His pistol barked twice, and one of the figures dropped. The other dove for cover. Movement west, Ron shouted. 3 of them, coming through the water. Okafor shifted position again and found the western approach. 3 fighters were wading through knee-deep flood water, using a submerged road as a path. She fired 3 times. 2 went down. The third retreated, dragging a wounded leg. 5 rounds remaining. The attack stalled. The surviving fighters went to ground, hiding behind debris and in shallow depressions, unwilling to advance into her fire. She had killed or wounded at least 8 of them. The others had learned caution. But caution would not last. They had numbers. She had 5 rounds. Sergeant. Nakamura's voice was weak. I found something. She crawled back to him, keeping low. He held up a handheld radio, battered and mud-caked but intact. Pulled it off one of the bodies that washed up, he explained. Enemy radio. I think it still works. Okafor took the radio and examined it. The casing was cracked, but the display showed power. She could hear voices crackling through the static. Pashto. She understood enough to catch fragments. She listened for a full minute, piecing together meaning from the broken transmissions. Her blood ran cold. Were they saying? Nakamura asked. They're calling for reinforcements. Okafor set down the radio. They expected this to be easy. Now, they want more men. And they're talking about the dam. What about it? She looked at him, then at Ron, then back at the ridgeline where more shapes were already gathering. It was not an accident, she said. They planned this. They sabotaged the dam and waited for the flood to destroy our position. They coordinated the attack to hit us when we were vulnerable. The weight of it settled over them. This was not opportunism. This was assassination by natural disaster. They tried to murder us with a river, Ron said quietly. His voice held something new. Not fear, anger. Yes, Okafor replied. They tried. She picked up her rifle and checked the magazine. 5 rounds. A dozen or more enemies regrouping on the high ground. No rescue in sight. But she was still alive. Her soldiers were still alive. And the enemy had just made this personal. They picked the wrong position to attack, Nakamura said. The words came slowly, but his eyes were clearer now, sharper. They picked the wrong sergeant. Okafor allowed herself a grim smile. They did not attack a position specialist. They attacked my people. She moved back to her fighting position and settled in to wait for the next wave. The enemy thought they had drowned her. They thought the flood had done their work. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The afternoon sun beat down on the valley and turned the mud into a steaming swamp. Okafor used the lull to fortify their position with whatever debris she could drag into place. Broken sandbags, shattered wooden beams, a twisted section of chain-link fence that had washed down from somewhere upstream. None of it would stop a bullet, but it would hide them, and right now concealment mattered more than cover. The enemy had pulled back to the ridgeline to regroup. She counted at least 15 figures moving among the rocks, more than before the first assault. Reinforcements had arrived. They were planning something. She needed a plan of her own. Sergeant. Ron's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Can I ask you something? She settled beside him in the shade of a leaning beam. Ask. Why did you join the army? I mean, you came from Nigeria. You could have done anything. Why this? Okafor considered the question. She had been asked it before in interviews and evaluations and late-night conversations with fellow soldiers. She usually gave the easy answer. Citizenship. Opportunity. A chance to serve. All true, but none of it complete. Ron had earned the complete answer. After my brother drowned, she began, I was broken. I blamed myself. I still blame myself. For years I could not look at water without shaking. I could not sleep without seeing his face. She paused, gathering memories she rarely visited. When I was 19, my mother sent me to live with my uncle in Detroit. She thought America would give me a fresh start. My uncle was a veteran. Vietnam. He saw what I was carrying, and he told me something I have never forgotten. What did he tell you? He said that guilt is a weight, and you can let it crush you, or you can let it drive you. He said the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living. He said the army taught him that. Ron was quiet, listening. I enlisted 3 months later. Okafor looked at her hands, calloused and scarred from years of service. Every deployment, every mission, every soldier I have brought home alive, that is for Kalechi. That is me telling him I am sorry. That is me proving I learned from losing him. You did not lose him, Sergeant. Ron's voice was gentle. He was taken from you. There's a difference. She looked at the young private, surprised by the wisdom in his words. What did you get so smart? I had a good teacher. He managed a weak smile. Someone who pulled me out of a flood and carried me through the mud with a broken leg. I would do it again. I know. That is why I'm not scared anymore. Okafor felt something shift in her chest. Not the weight lifting, not exactly, but the weight becoming bearable. Shared. What about you? She asked. Why did you join? Ron laughed softly, then winced as the movement jarred his leg. Honestly, I wanted to prove I was not a coward. My whole life, I have been afraid of everything. Heights, crowds, failure. I thought the army would fix me, make me brave. Has it? I do not know. Ron looked toward the ridgeline where their enemies waited. But I know that when the flood hit, I grabbed that tree and I did not let go. And when you gave me this pistol, I did not freeze. I shot that man. I did not hesitate. That is not nothing private. That is everything. The sound of boots squelching through mud interrupted them. Okafor spun, rifle raised, then relaxed when she saw Nakamura crawling toward them. His movement was steadier now, his eyes more focused. The concussion was still there, but he was fighting through it. They are moving, he reported, spreading out along the ridge. I think they're going to try to surround us before the next assault. How many approaches can they use? 4, maybe 5. Nakamura had drawn a rough map in the mud. North is the main slope. East and west have those gullies we saw earlier. South is the flooded area, but has been draining. They might try to come through there too. Okafor studied the map. 5 approaches, 3 defenders, 5 bullets. She needed to change the math. The radio, she said. The enemy radio you found. Does it still work? Nakamura pulled it from his pocket. Battery is low, but yes. Can you find a frequency FOB Resolute monitors? He thought for a moment. Maybe. The emergency band is standard. If I can boost the signal somehow, they might hear us. Do it. Even if you cannot reach them, keep trying. Someone might pick up our transmission. Nakamura nodded and began working the radio, his technical skills overcoming the fog in his head. Okafor turned back to the ridgeline. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. In a few hours, darkness would fall. The enemy could use that darkness to close the distance, to overwhelm her position with numbers she could not match. She needed to make the daylight count. Ron, she said, I need you to do something difficult. Name it. I'm going to reposition to higher ground. That broken structure to the north. From there I can see all the approaches. But it means leaving you and Nakamura here alone. Ron swallowed hard but did not look away. We can handle it. If they come before I am in position, you stay quiet. You stay hidden. You let them pass if you have to. Your job is to survive, not to fight. Understood? Understood, Sergeant. She handed him the captured enemy radio. If Nakamura reaches FOB Resolute, you tell them everything. Our position, our situation, the sabotage. Everything. I will. Okafor looked at both of her soldiers. Wounded, exhausted, outgunned. But not beaten. Not yet. I am proud of you, she said. Both of you. Whatever happens tonight, remember that. She did not wait for a response. She turned and began crawling through the debris toward the shattered structure on the northern rise. Behind her, she heard Nakamura's voice crackling into the radio, calling for anyone who could hear. The sun touched the mountains and began to sink. Shadows stretched across the valley, and on the ridgeline, the enemy started to move. Darkness swallowed the valley in stages. First the shadows merged, then the details faded, then everything beyond 30 meters became shapes and suggestions. The moon was a thin crescent, offering almost nothing. Okafor lay in the ruins of the shattered structure and let her eyes adjust. She could hear them now. Boots in mud. Whispered commands in Pashto. the occasional clink of metal on metal. They were coming from at least 3 directions, just as Nakamura had predicted. North, east, and west. Moving slowly, carefully, believing the darkness hid them. It did not hide them from her. 14 years of deployments had taught her to see in ways that had nothing to do with light. She watched for movement against the static background. She listened for sounds that did not belong. She felt the vibrations in the ground when heavy boots stepped too close. 3 figures approached from the north, following the main slope down from the ridgeline. She tracked them through the darkness, counting steps, measuring distance. 200 meters. 150. 100. She had 5 rounds. She needed to make each one count. The lead figure stepped into a patch of slightly lighter ground where the mud reflected what little moonlight existed. Okafor exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked and the figure dropped. The other 2 scattered, diving for cover, shouting warnings to their companions. 4 rounds. Muzzle flashes erupted from the east and west as the flanking groups opened fire on her position. Bullets snapped overhead and thudded into the debris around her. She pressed herself flat and crawled backward, abandoning the position before they could zero in. She moved 20 meters south and found new cover behind a collapsed wall. The enemy fire continued, chewing apart the structure she had just left. They thought she was still there. Good. A figure rose from cover to the east, trying to advance while his companions provided suppression. Okafor put him down with a single shot. 3 rounds. The firing intensified. She counted muzzle flashes. 8, maybe 10 shooters, all focused on her original position. She had seconds before they realized she had moved. She sprinted south, keeping low, using the terrain. A burst of fire tracked behind her, close enough that she felt the wind of passing rounds. She dove behind a mound of debris and rolled, coming up with her rifle ready. 2 figures emerged from the western gully, moving fast, trying to flank her new position. She fired twice. 1 dropped. The other stumbled but kept coming, wounded but not stopped. 1 round. The wounded fighter raised his weapon. Okafor threw herself sideways as he fired, feeling the heat of the round pass her cheek. She hit the ground hard, and her rifle slipped from her grip. The fighter advanced, limping, his weapon trained on her. She could see his face now, twisted with pain and hatred. He said something in Pashto. A curse, maybe, a promise of death. Okafor's hand found a rock in the mud. She hurled it at his face and charged. The rock struck his wounded shoulder, and he flinched. It was enough. She closed the distance before he could aim and drove her knee into his gut. He folded, and she ripped the rifle from his hands, spinning it around and slamming the stock into his temple. He went down and did not move. She grabbed his weapon and checked the magazine. Full. 30 rounds. The math had changed. New rifle in hand, she moved back toward her soldiers. The enemy fire had shifted, no longer focused on her position. They were advancing on the low ground where Nakamura and Ron waited. She ran. The first enemy she encountered was facing away from her, moving toward the debris pile where her wounded soldiers hid. She shot him in the back and kept moving. 2 more turned at the sound, and she dropped them both before they could raise their weapons. 27 rounds. A burst of pistol fire erupted from the debris pile. Nakamura. Then a scream, not from her soldiers, but from an enemy who had gotten too close. Okafor reached the position and found Nakamura on his knees, the pistol empty, an enemy fighter motionless at his feet. Blood ran from a fresh cut on Nakamura's arm, but his eyes were fierce. 2 more came from the east, he gasped. Got 1. The other circled around. Where's Ron? Here. The voice came from behind a shattered beam. Ron was exactly where she had left him, the enemy radio clutched in one hand, her sidearm in the other. A body lay 5 meters from his position, face down in the mud. I did not let him get close. Okafor felt something swell in her chest. Pride. These are her soldiers. Wounded, outgunned, terrified. And they had held. The enemy fire had stopped. She scanned the darkness and saw shapes retreating toward the ridgeline. They had lost too many. The easy cleanup had become a costly fight, and they were pulling back to reassess. It would not last. They would regroup. They would come again. And she had 27 rounds against however many remained. But they had survived the night assault. They had proven they were not easy prey. Nakamura slumped against the debris, exhausted. I reached someone, he said. On the radio. Could not hold a signal, but I got through. Gave them our grid coordinates. Did they confirm? I do not know. The signal cut out. Okafor looked east, toward FOB Resolute, toward help that might or might not be coming. Dawn was still hours away. The enemy would attack again before then. She checked her rifle, checked her soldiers, checked the perimeter. Then she settled in to wait for whatever came next. The night was not over, but neither was she. The hours before dawn were the longest of Okafor's life. She moved constantly, checking angles, scanning the darkness, listening for the sounds that would announce the next attack. Her body ached from the flood, from the fighting, from the graze on her cheek that had crusted over with dry blood. Exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, but she refused to give in. Nakamura had passed out from his concussion, his body finally surrendering to the trauma it had endured. His breathing was steady but shallow. Ron sat beside him, the captured radio in his lap, watching for any sign of incoming transmission. Anything, Okafor asked. Static. Ron shook his head. Maybe they did not hear us. Maybe help is not coming. Help is coming. She said it with more certainty than she felt. We hold until it does. The enemy had been quiet since the failed night assault. Too quiet. She had counted at least 6 bodies scattered across the approaches, plus the ones from the earlier attacks. They had lost more than half their force. But the survivors were still out there, still watching, still waiting. She found herself staring at the ridgeline, searching for movement. A faint glow was beginning to touch the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming. If they could survive until full daylight, the enemy would lose their advantage. Aircraft could fly. Reinforcements could move. If they could survive. Movement on the ridge. She raised the captured rifle and peered through the darkness. A single figure stood silhouetted against the lightening sky. Tall, authoritative, giving orders to shapes that gathered around him. The commander. She recognized the posture, the way the others deferred to him. He was the one directing this attack. The one who had planned the damn sabotage. The one who had sent his men to die in the mud. The distance was at least 800 meters. Iron sights. A rifle she had never zeroed. A wounded arm that trembled with fatigue. Impossible. But if she could take him down, the attack might fall apart. Leaderless men made mistakes. Leaderless men retreated. She settled into a prone position and steadied the rifle against a chunk of concrete. The figure on the ridge was giving orders, pointing toward her position, completely confident that he was out of range. Okafor slowed her breathing. She thought about the wind, the distance, the drop. She thought about 14 years of marksmanship training, about the ranger instructors who had pushed her beyond what she thought possible, about every hour on the range making shots that others said could not be made. She thought about Kalechi, about promises made, about refusing to fail. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked, and the round disappeared into the distance. The figure on the ridge did not fall. Mississippi. She adjusted, compensating for wind, and fired again. The commander jerked and crumpled. Even at this distance, she could see the chaos that erupted. Men scrambling, shouting, dragging the body into cover. The careful formation dissolved into panic. Sergeant. Ron's voice was odd. That was 800 meters. She did not respond. She was already shifting her aim to the disorganized fighters now rushing down the slope. They were no longer advancing tactically. They were charging in rage, wanting revenge for their fallen leader. She dropped the first one at 600 meters, the second at 500. The third stumbled and fell on his own, tripping in the mud, and she put him down before he could rise. 23 rounds remaining. They kept coming. 6 fighters now, maybe 7, spreading out, but still advancing. Their fire was wild, undisciplined, kicking up mud and debris nowhere near her position. 400 meters. She fired twice more. 2 more dropped. 300 meters. The survivors finally broke. 2 turned and ran back toward the ridge. The others went to ground, hiding behind whatever cover they could find. Okafor waited. The sky continued to lighten. The first true rays of sunlight broke over the mountains and painted the valley in shades of gold and brown. Then she heard it, a sound she had been praying for through the endless night. Distant at first, then growing louder. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. Ron heard it too. His head snapped up, his eyes searching the sky. "Sergeant, is that what I think it is?" Okafor scanned the eastern horizon and saw them. Two black shapes coming fast and low over the terrain. Blackhawks, the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. The remaining enemy fighters heard the helicopters too. They broke from cover and ran, scrambling up the ridge, fleeing back the way they had come. The fight was over. They knew it. The lead helicopter banked over the debris field, and a voice crackled through the radio in Ron's hands. "Dagger position. This is Resolute QRF. Identify yourself." Ron fumbled with the radio, his hands shaking. "This is Private First Class Ron. We have Sergeant First Class Okafor and Specialist Nakamura. 2 wounded. 1 urgent surgical. Position secure." There was a pause. Then the voice returned, different now, touched with something like disbelief. "Say again, Dagger. Did you say position secure?" Okafor took the radio from Ron. "Resolute QRF. This is Sergeant First Class Okafor. Confirmed. Position secure. 3 defenders. Approximately 11 enemy Kia. Request immediate medevac for head trauma and compound fracture." The helicopter circled overhead and began its descent. The second bird took up an overwatch position, door gunner scanning for any remaining threats. Okafor stood. Her legs trembled beneath her. Her shoulder screamed. Her cheek throbbed. But she stood, rifle in hand, watching the helicopter touch down in the mud. She did not move until the medics reached Nakamura. She did not move until they loaded Ron onto a stretcher. She did not move until a young sergeant from the QRF approached her with wide eyes and a stunned expression. "Sergeant Okafor? Ma'am, did you really hold this position all night? Against all of them?" She looked at the bodies scattered across the valley, at the wounded soldiers being loaded into the helicopter, at the sun rising over the mountains she had never expected to see again. "I made a promise," she said. "I did not break promises." Then she walked toward the helicopter under her own power, refusing the stretcher they offered, refusing to be carried. She had brought her soldiers home. The helicopter touched down at FOB Resolute, and the medics were waiting. Okafor watched them rush Nakamura toward the field hospital, shouting vitals and orders. Ron followed on a stretcher, his hand raised in a weak wave as they carried him past. She lifted her hand in response and held it there until he disappeared through the doors. A medic approached her with a trauma kit. "Sergeant, we need to check you out. That wound on your face needs treatment, and you might have internal injuries from the flood." "I am fine." "Sergeant, with respect, you're not fine. You have been through hell." She looked at the young medic, barely older than Ron, and saw genuine concern in his eyes. She softened. 15 minutes, she said. "Then I need to report to Captain Ibarra." The medic cleaned and bandaged the graze on her cheek, checked her shoulder for fractures, and confirmed what she already knew. Bruised ribs, strained muscles, minor lacerations. Nothing that would kill her. Nothing that would stop her. Word had spread across the base by the time she emerged from the medical tent. Soldiers stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some nodded. Others stared. A few came to attention as if she were a general instead of sergeant. She ignored them all and walked toward the operations center. Vance intercepted her before she reached the door. He looked smaller than she remembered. His shoulders were hunched and his eyes darted around, unable to meet hers directly. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Okafor," he started. "I heard what happened out there. I wanted to say that I'm glad you made it back." She stopped and faced him. She did not speak. "Look what happened at OP Dagger. That was not supposed to happen. The flood, the attack, none of that was supposed to happen. I did not know. But you sent me there. It was supposed to be routine. Easy duty. I thought you would just sit there for a week and come back. I did not know about any of this. You sent me there because you wanted to humiliate me." Okafor's voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried the weight of everything she had survived. You told Captain Ibarra I needed light duty. You told everyone I could not handle real assignments. You put me and my soldiers in the worst position on this base because you could not stand that I earned my rank. Vance's mouth opened, but no words came out. 3 of my soldiers almost died. I spent 18 hours fighting for our lives against enemies who planned that attack, who sabotaged that dam, who tried to murder us while we were vulnerable. And the only reason I was there, the only reason any of us were there, was because you wanted to put me in my place. I did not know about the attack, Vance repeated. His voice cracked. No, you did not know. Okafor stepped closer. But you created the conditions. You put us in the kill zone. Your pettiness, your jealousy, your inability to accept that a woman from Nigeria could be better at this job than you. That almost got my soldiers killed. Vance had nothing. No defense. No excuse. Just the hollow expression of a man confronting the consequences of his choices. I'm not going to report what you did, Okafor said. Not because you deserve protection, but because I have more important things to do than destroy your career. But know this, Sergeant First Class Vance. I see you now. Everyone sees you now. And if you ever put soldiers at risk again because of your ego, I will end you. She walked past him without waiting for a response. Captain Ibarra was waiting in the operations center. The commander's face was unreadable as Okafor entered and came to attention. At ease, Sergeant. Sit down. Okafor remained standing. I would prefer to stand, ma'am. Ibarra nodded slowly. I have read the preliminary reports, heard the radio traffic, seen the drone footage from this morning. She paused. What you did out there should not have been possible. My soldiers needed me, ma'am. I did what was necessary. You held a position alone against a coordinated enemy assault for over 12 hours. You killed or wounded at least 11 fighters. You kept 2 critically wounded soldiers alive through a flash flood and a night attack. And you did it with a single rifle and limited ammunition. Okafor said nothing. Ibarra stood and walked around her desk. I also know how you ended up at OP Dagger. I know what Vance said to me. I know I should have questioned it. Ma'am, I'm not here to assign blame. No, you are here because you're a professional. Ibarra's voice hardened, but I'm assigning blame to myself. I'll let politics and personalities affect my command decisions. I put you in a position where you had to become a one-woman army just to survive. That failure is mine. Okafor met the captain's eyes. What matters now is that my soldiers are alive. Nakamura and Ron are going to recover. Estes and Solano were rescued downstream with minor injuries. My team survived because of you, because we were soldiers, all of us. Ibarra studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk and pulled out a folder. Intelligence analysis came back on the enemy radio you captured. It confirms what Nakamura reported. The dam's sabotage was deliberate. The attack was pre-planned. They knew exactly when and where to hit. She closed the folder. You did not just survive an attack, Sergeant. You disrupted a coordinated operation. The intelligence you recovered is already being used to identify the network behind it. Okafor felt something loosen in her chest. It had meant something. All of it. I am recommending you for the Silver Star, Ibarra continued. And I am personally requesting that Vance be transferred to a different unit. He will not face formal charges, but he will not serve in my command any longer. Thank you, ma'am. Do not thank me. Ibarra extended her hand. Thank yourself. You earned everything that is coming to you, and I am sorry it took almost losing you for me to see it. Okafor shook her commander's hand. Then she walked out into the Afghan sun, feeling lighter than she had in years. 3 days passed before Okafor allowed herself to rest. She spent the first day writing reports, documenting every detail of the flood and the attack while the memories were fresh. She spent the second day being interviewed by intelligence officers who wanted to understand how a 3-person team had dismantled a coordinated enemy operation. She spent the third day checking on her soldiers. Nakamura was awake when she entered the field hospital. His head was wrapped in fresh bandages and dark circles shadowed his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her. Sergeant. He tried to sit up and winced. This had been by every few hours. You should be resting. I will rest when my soldiers are recovered. She pulled a chair beside his bed. How is the head? Doctors say no permanent damage. Concussion was bad, but I got lucky. Another few hours without treatment, and it could have been different. You held on. That is not luck. That is strength. Nakamura was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about what happened out there. The things I saw you do. The shot on that commander. Fighting hand to hand in the dark. I have served with a lot of soldiers, Sergeant. I have never served with anyone like you. Okafor shook her head. I did what needed to be done. Nothing more. No. He met her eyes. You did what no one else could have done. And you did it to save us. I will spend the rest of my career trying to be half the soldier you are. She did not know how to respond to that. She had never been comfortable with praise, never known how to hold the weight of other people's admiration. So she simply nodded and squeezed his shoulder. Get some rest, specialist. That is an order. She found Ron in a bed at the far end of the ward. His leg was encased in a proper cast now, elevated on pillows, and the color had returned to his face. He was reading a worn paperback novel when she approached. Sergeant, he set the book aside immediately. I was hoping you would come by. How is the leg? Doctors say it will heal clean. No permanent damage. I will be back on my feet in 8 weeks, maybe less. Good. You did well out there, private. Better than well. Ron's expression shifted, becoming serious. Can I tell you something, Sergeant? Go ahead. Before the flood, before any of this happened, I was thinking about quitting, putting in for a discharge. I was convinced I did not have what it takes to be a real soldier, that I was just pretending. Okafor listened without interrupting. But out there, when everything went wrong, when you gave me that pistol and told me to watch the flank, something changed. I was terrified. My leg was broken, and I could barely move, and I knew we were probably going to die. But I did not quit. I did not freeze. When that fighter came around the debris pile, I shot him. I did what needed to be done. You did. Because of you. Ron's voice cracked slightly. You show me what courage actually looks like. It is not being fearless. It is being scared out of your mind and doing your job anyway. You taught me that. Not with words. With everything you did. Okafor felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The one that came when emotions threatened to break through her careful control. She took a breath and let it settle. You taught yourself private. I just gave you the opportunity to see who you really are. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ron spoke again. Sergeant, what was in the letter? The one you always carry? She had known he would ask eventually. She reached in her pocket and pulled out the worn envelope. The paper was soft from years of handling, stained now with mud and river water, but still intact. My mother wrote this the day I left for basic training. She said, I told her I was joining the army to become strong enough to protect people, to make sure no one else died the way Kelechi died. She did not try to stop me. She just gave me this letter and told me to open it when I was ready. Have you ever opened it? Okafor looked at the envelope in her hands. She had carried it through 4 deployments, through firefights and floods, and the darkest nights of her life. She had never opened it. Part of her had always believed that opening it meant she had finished something, that her journey was complete. Maybe now it was. She slid her finger under the seal and carefully unfolded the paper inside. Her mother's handwriting was faded but legible. The words were in Igbo, the language of her childhood, the language of home. She read them silently. Then again, then a third time as her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. What does it say? Ron asked softly. Okafor took a moment to find her voice. It says, you were born to protect. Your brother knew this. He would be proud of the woman you are becoming. Go and come home. We will be waiting. She folded the letter carefully and returned it to her pocket. For 18 years, she had wondered what her mother had written. For 18 years, she had been afraid the words would break her. Instead, they had set her free. Sergeant. Ron reached out and touched her arm. You came home. Okafor looked at this young soldier who had faced his fears and found his courage, who had fought beside her in the darkness and emerged stronger. Yes, she said. We both did. She stayed with him until he fell asleep, watching over him as she had watched over her soldiers through the long night in the valley. Then she walked out into the evening air and looked up at the stars beginning to emerge over the Afghan mountains. For the first time in 18 years, she did not see Kelechi's face when she closed her eyes. She saw her soldiers. Alive. Safe. Home. And that was enough. 2 weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Whitmore arrived at FOB Resolute. The battalion commander was not known for field visits. He ran operations from headquarters, trusting his captains to manage the forward bases. When word spread that he was coming specifically to investigate the OP Dagger incident, rumors flew across the base like wildfire. Okafor heard the speculation but paid it no attention. She had returned to duty, leading her reconstituted fire team through training exercises and routine patrols. Estes and Solano had rejoined her after recovering from their injuries downstream. Nakamura was back on limited duty, handling communications until he was cleared for full operations. Only Ron remained in medical, though he was expected to return within the month. She was cleaning her rifle in the equipment bay when Captain Ibarra found her. Sergeant Okafor, Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore would like to see you in the operations center. Now, ma'am? Now. She set down her rifle and followed Ibarra across the base. Soldiers watched her pass, just as they had since the flood. The stairs no longer bothered her. She had stopped caring what people thought the moment she pulled her soldiers from that water. Whitmore was waiting in the briefing room. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who had spent 3 decades in uniform. His eyes tracked her as she entered and came to attention. Sergeant First Class Okafor reporting as ordered, sir. At ease, Sergeant. Please sit. She sat across from him at the conference table. Ibarra remained standing near the door. Whitmore studied her for a long moment before speaking. I have read every report, interviewed every witness, reviewed the drone footage and the intelligence analysis. I have been in the Army for 31 years, Sergeant. I have seen heroism. I have seen sacrifice. I have seen soldiers perform beyond what anyone thought possible. He leaned forward. What you did at OP Dagger is something else entirely. Okafor kept her expression neutral. I did my duty, sir. Your duty. Whitmore almost smiled. You survived a flash flood that destroyed your position. You rescued 2 wounded soldiers from the water. You held a defensive position alone for over 12 hours against a coordinated enemy assault. You killed 11 fighters, including a regional commander, with a rifle you had never zeroed at a distance of 800 meters. You did all of this while facing your worst fear. Sir, I read your full file, Sergeant, including the psychological evaluation from when you enlisted. Whitmore's voice softened. I know about your brother. I know what water means to you, and I know that you faced that fear to save your soldiers. Okafor felt the old wound pulse, but it did not bleed. Not anymore. My brother died because I could not save him, she said quietly. I will not let anyone else die that way. Not while I am breathing. Whitmore nodded slowly. That is exactly the kind of soldier this army needs. The kind who turns pain into purpose. The kind who refuses to quit when everything says they should. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Afghan mountains. The Silver Star recommendation has been approved, he said. But I did not come here just to tell you that. I came because I wanted to meet the woman who held the line alone, who looked at impossible odds and decided that impossible was not good enough. He turned back to face her. Sergeant First Class Okafor, you are a credit to this uniform. You are a credit to every soldier who has ever served. And I am honored to have you in my command. He extended his hand. She rose and shook it. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me. Whitmore held her grip for a moment longer. Thank yourself. You earned this. Every bit of it. The ceremony was held 3 days later in the main assembly area. The entire base turned out. Soldiers stood in formation under the Afghan sun as Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore pinned the Silver Star to Okafor's chest. The citation was read aloud, detailing her actions during the flood and the assault. Words like extraordinary heroism and gallantry in action echoed across the silent crowd. Okafor stood at attention and let the words wash over her. She thought about Kelechi, about her mother's letter, about the 18 years she had spent trying to prove she was worthy of surviving when he did not. She did not need to prove anything anymore. After the ceremony, her soldiers gathered around her. Nakamura shook her hand with tears in his eyes. Estes and Solano hugged her despite protocol, and Ron, on crutches but determined to attend, stood before her with a smile that said everything words could not. "Sergeant," he said, "I told you this would count as combat pay." She laughed. The sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that, free and unguarded. That evening, she walked to the small memorial near the base chapel. It was a quiet place, just a few stones arranged in a circle where soldiers could remember those they had lost. She knelt and placed a small pebble among the others. In Nigerian tradition, you leave a stone to show you visited, to show you remember. "Kelechi," she whispered, "I learned to swim. I learned to fight the water. You taught me that. You taught me that drowning is not the end. It is the beginning of learning to breathe." She stayed there as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked back toward her soldiers. The flood had tried to take everything from her. It had taken her position, her equipment, nearly taken her life. But it had not taken what mattered most. Her soldiers were alive. Her purpose was clear. Her brother's memory was honored. And Sergeant First Class Yolanda Okafor, the woman who held the line alone, was finally at peace. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about what resonated most, or tell us about someone you know who faced their deepest fear to protect others.